Howdy there again, peeps. How's everybody doing? Well, I'm back for part 2 of the DMT and psychedelics video. I got cut off just right at when I was saying thank you to my patrons. So, as I was saying, thanks to my patrons. And the discussion was going to continue, but as I ran out of camera space, I was pretty much at the end of my notes and I kind of finished it off, which was fine because I don't really have any notes for this one. I wanted to talk about my personal experiences with psychedelics. And I'd like to start off with a disclaimer that this video is not intended to promote any use of illegal substances, and that people should honestly look into their local laws and be cautious. And I say that not just as an obligation, to not have an issue with YouTube or with anybody else, but because I've seen, like I said, firsthand what can happen with psychedelic induced psychosis. This can be a temporary condition that can wane over time, but uh, taking too many psychedelics can give you grandiose delusions, or it can put you into all kinds of different psychotic states if you're predisposed to that, which usually happens in the adolescent or teen years, but it can happen at any time. Now, it just happens to directly coincide with about the time when people start experimenting with these things. And for those who aren't likely to have any type of psychosis, these substances can help us see clearer into our own lives and understand the things we need to do in order to move forward in life. The question is why. And this is why I'm so fascinated with them. Now, I have a vast experience with psychedelics since I was about 15 years old. So, 30 years. But I haven't taken them in quite a while, and I don't take them very often. I mean, maybe once a year, twice a year. But in the past, I would take them every other weekend, at least with my friends. And we would wander down to Portland, pick some up, come back home, and enjoy a nice evening of playing with Christmas lights, listening to music, just talking, whatever we might do. And those moments are very vivid in my mind, and they brought me to, I don't know, in other words, when people first start taking psychedelics, it's often for the experience of, wow, something new and novelty. And that's understandable. Anytime you try something new, it's usually in that context. Today that's changing because psychedelics are used in a medical setting, which is kind of interesting for people who have never just gone out and had a good time with psychedelics, who are just taking it in that laboratory setting. They might feel a little bit overwhelmed, but it does help people, and it's really crucial that if you're going to use it for any type of therapy, that you know what you're doing and you use it with the proper guidance and someone who knows what they're talking about. It's just like you can go to anyone for advice, but if you want good advice, you got to know who you're talking to. But one of the beautiful things about psychedelics is that they are the guidance. And so what I wanted to say was that DMT itself, the reason why I've never really talked much about it and why I don't promote it really in this video as much is because it's as if Terrence McKenna said, it's like being shot out of a rocket to the moon, blasted out of a cannon. It's an instant holy shit, and then you're back again. And I've asked a lot of people who have taken DMT or smoked a lot, and believe me, I've smoked a lot. In fact, sitting 5 feet from here on my porch in a chair, I sat down one time and I smoked as much as I could. It was an intense moment. I remember being blasted through the universe into this crazy place. When I was coming back from that place, I was looking over at this deck that used to be here, and there were tie-dye streams swirling down each board, zigzagging the whole deck. It was the most wild thing I'd ever seen. And that was still, that wasn't even as wild as the things that you see when you're there, but I mean the most wild thing I've seen when I can see with my eyeballs. And those experiences blew my mind, blew it wide open. But I continually came back asking, what did I get from this? What am I gaining from this? Okay, what, and I've heard a lot of folks say, well, it was like I lived 1,000 years in just a moment, or I downloaded the whole universe's knowledge into your mind. It's like, okay, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Do something. It's kind of like a bragging rights thing, and I'm not saying everyone has that experience, but a lot of folks who take psychedelics think that, the psychonaut experience is all about how far you go, and that is absolutely not it. It's not about how deep you go, it's about what you bring back from it. So while the DMT experience is phenomenal, I'm going to mainly move to psilocybin and LSD here. Now, psilocybin and DMT are very similar acting. Different compounds, different chemicals. LSD is derived from a natural source, which is the ergot fungus, but, you know, it's not always, you know, all I can say is that LSD is more rigid, psilocybin mushrooms are more rounded. And I mean that in a metaphoric sense, and if you have ever taken them, you might know what I mean. And LSD, it does tend to last longer. Maybe I can do more and feel a little more energized. But mushrooms demand something special of you. The compounds and the cocktails within the psychedelic mushrooms are phenomenal. And we're not talking about, you know, some disassociatives or deliriants like, you know, when you see the regular Santa Claus mushroom, right? Those aren't psilocybin mushrooms. It's, I believe, muscarine in those, but it's a different story altogether. Psilocybin mushrooms have, some of them have a variety of different, you know, compounds within them, including baeocystin and some other really heavier compounds. In fact, some mushrooms can almost give you wood lovers paralysis, they call it, which with certain psychedelic mushrooms. But I don't want to get into the details of the mushrooms. They're just fascinating to me because they're messengers. It's nature's way, in my mind, and this is all in my mind, nature's way of saying, look, this is what's important. And no matter how you look at it, if you take them in the right context, in the right setting, the mushrooms will always tell you where you're going good in your life, and where you could improve, and how to do something good for yourself and for others, for the world. And at least for me, in my experience. And a lot of folks are scared off by that, because it can honestly show you a lot of flaws you didn't know you had. And as I was younger, when I was in my teen years, I started picking those flaws and getting rid of them and going, okay, yeah, I am that way, or I don't want to be this way. And now I've settled into who I am as an adult. It's harder to change, very difficult, compared to being a kid where you can just have a realization and be like, oh, and just be a different person almost. We are kind of who we are, and it makes it really difficult to break free. Psychedelics seem to open up channels that allow us to rewire our brains, and that's why it's so widely studied right now in psychology and psychiatry, I guess, a variety of different fields, you know, neuroscience, neurochemistry, and understanding how to rewire the human brain, I guess, would be a very valuable tool. You know, it was of course used in MK Ultra and various mind control projects in the 50s and 60s. That's why LSD came into play, is because Sandoz Laboratories manufactured it in Switzerland. The CIA bought up the whole supply. They started distributing it. Timothy Leary and others got a hold of it. The rest is history. LSD brought a whole generation into understanding psychedelics, and mushrooms weren't even that popular. Gordon Wasson was the only real psychonaut who had gone down to Mexico to find these magic psychedelic mushrooms back in the like 60s or 50s, and he, you know, not a lot of Americans were familiar with these things. And mushrooms to me are kind of like the unspoken hero of history. In a lot of cultures, they were revered, and for good reason. You know, if you have an entire group of human beings who are slowly starting to develop consciousness, and nature is trying to, let's just say nature has a plan, and it wants to develop consciousness, and I'm going with that assumption here, perhaps the mushrooms would be kind of a guiding light. In other words, certain psychedelics could be nature's way of saying, whoa, wait a minute, if you might be off track in a certain way, and don't forget this. And the biggest lesson, the hugest lesson that you ever learn in a psychedelic experience is that death is an illusion. And I'm not saying that you don't die, and I'm not saying that your mind doesn't wither away and eventually just dissipate, because it likely does. Everything does. You learn to accept it, not to fight it. You don't have to worry about living in eternity in the clouds. It's not even a thought. At a point, you learn to just let go of that and realize that because of the fact that you are part of the whole. In this pantheism type mentality, I would say, you are part of the whole, therefore your mind is always going to be part of the ether, if you'll call it, for lack of a better term, part of the cosmos, part of this, I guess what I mentioned in the first video as this primal proto consciousness that may be what dark matter is. And that might sound like bullshit, but you know what? People saying over 90% of the universe is invisible and we don't know what it is complete bullshit. Everything we know is bullshit. And so I just like to go on this note to finalize, this. I don't want to make this too long. And I'm mainly focused on psilocybin because it's been a huge tool for me for growth. And I'm way past due for a visit. But it's very dose dependent, and it's very important you talk to someone who knows what they're doing. And you don't want to take too much. I've seen people lose it and go way past the needed amount. I've personally taken up to 7 grams of golden teachers, which are extremely potent mushrooms, and it was very intense. But that was the most I ever took, and I prefer to take maybe 4 to 5. And that's still a pretty strong dose, but to me it's about breaking through. And on a final note about microdosing, because I know people will ask me this, what do I think about microdosing? And if you don't know, microdosing became popular through Silicon Valley. The entrepreneurs down there who decided that taking small doses of LSD regularly, maybe it's every couple days or every few days, some people said every day, it just depends on what, but the person, but we're talking maybe technically it's supposed to be like a 16th of a dose, or maybe even a tenth of a dose, but a very small amount of a hit of acid, to where you don't feel it, but it's supposed to have effects on your well-being. I'm not doubting that these things might have short-term benefit, but I would like to just say this. Psychedelics fit like a key to a lock. In those synapses, in those receptors, which also accept serotonin. Serotonin is your reality compound, if you will, for lack of a better way to define it. It kind of is what helps you kind of feel your reality. They say it's the feel-good chemical, but it's more complicated. We don't know all the details. These psychedelics like psilocybin fit those keys like a lock. Not only that, but these synapses have a little flap. The little door closes over LSD molecules, for example, which is why they stay in there and it lasts so long. It doesn't do this over serotonin or other compounds that our body produces. Only these psychedelics, and holds them in there for a long time, and gradually they dissolve instead of being let go. It's an interesting thing when you think about it. It means that the body's utilizing that as kind of the reality compound. If you think about it, it's almost like a tuner. If you think of the way a crystal works and resonates at a certain frequency, well, when you're in that state, you see things through a certain lens. A lens that may have been available, let's say, to ancient man, but isn't available anymore. And perhaps maybe they wouldn't even be able to utilize that lens in their mind because they weren't capable of speech to be able to share it with others. And so I guess what I'm saying is that perhaps these mushrooms are nature's lens into the mind of nature. They are nature's language, a way for us to understand where it's coming from. Because when I've taken them out in nature, I'm just constantly in awe and amazed by everything around me. And it's a fascinating thing. You can't define it to anyone who hasn't been there. And I'd like to say that I'm halfway between, let's just say I'm not a complete believer like Timothy Leary that everybody needs to take psychedelics. Like I said, I've seen potential for damage firsthand, but I think overall it benefits a vast amount of people. It's not worth demonizing it over such a small amount of the population who possibly just didn't take the right dose. The benefits are immense. In fact, locking our congressmen and our presidents or potential candidates and anybody in the House and Senate, and locking them all in a room, making them take mushrooms once a year might be the best thing we could ever do for our country. I don't know. It sounds so ridiculous, but every time I've thought about that for years. It's always been like, in other words, when you meet someone face to face, it's completely different, for example. So when world leaders don't converse except over the phone or video, it's not the same as being there and shaking someone's hand and saying, hey, you feel like you know them. When it comes to an experience of the divine, or an enchanted experience like psychedelics can bring, they take you there. And once you've been there, it's not a matter of trying to escape reality to get back there. It's a matter of utilizing that experience to try to better your current life. And those are the lessons that I've learned through psychedelics. And while DMT hasn't been the greatest teacher, it has shown me at least that there is another channel that people can tap into. My best example is that psilocybin helps you kind of sit at nature's frequency, and LSD can do the same, whereas DMT is almost like it tunes you into some channel between with static that you're not supposed to be at. You know, people talk about entities, about sounds, the things that they hear. All I can describe is when you're traveling to that place, when you've consumed DMT, there's this buzzing sound. To me, it sounds almost like a dial-up modem from back in the 90s, you know, where it's like dials up and it makes all those beeping sounds with a and everything, and then everything just fades to this new place. And when you've been there, it's really hard to discount that you've been somewhere. But we have to realize that the mind is fucking amazing. And I guess to come full circle from the first video, dreams, once we shut down, our brains basically operate as if they would in our waking life, but down at the brainstem, it shuts down this little area that moves motor, you know, the motor part of our body, and therefore we're not going to run in place in bed while we're running in a dream. And some people that doesn't work, it malfunctions, so they get up and they drive and they do all kinds of things. Those are like sleepwalkers and people who do a lot of weird things in their sleep. So an Ambien apparently can cause that, as it appears to be. Maybe it short circuits it or whatnot, but the point is that sleep is really complicated. What are dreams and why do we have them? Why is it that even when we, no matter what drugs we consume or what we do, eventually dreams creep through? They want to be heard, especially in times of anxiety or stress. My dreams are wild, you know, going through buildings and bridges and always being up in high places and precarious areas. And so anyhow, those are my experiences. I guess I haven't really given you my psychedelic journeys but I'm just letting you know that, you know, that's what I think about psychedelics. I've had some really interesting trips. If you actually want me to share some of my trip experiences, I'd love to, but I don't know. It's not the kind of thing I figure most of my subscribers really want to listen to is my trip, but we've had some fun ones. Maybe I will sometime. Anyway, I guess that concludes my part 2 here of talking about DMT and psychedelics. It was really supposed to be kind of a precursor. This was supposed to be almost a preamble instead to my enlightenment video I was going to do later, and I was like, just got off track, started talking about all these interesting concepts because I think that my mind is telling me it's time. It's time for me to take a journey. And I'm ready. It's just hard because, you know, I've got responsibilities and I can't just party when I want, and I'm getting older, of course, you know, that it makes you a little more wary. It should make you wary of tripping, but it'll always be part of my life. I admire, like, you know, Alexander Shulgin, Sasha, and his wife, and you know, he just up into their old years trying and creating new psychedelics. I thought that was awesome. But that's a story for another time. You don't want to hear that one. I'll talk to y'all soon. And thanks for listening, and let me know what your experiences and thoughts are with psychedelics, because, you know, Denver decriminalized mushrooms. It's only a matter of time. It's been on the ballot, I think, in Oregon, too. They're trying to get it on the ballot. And so it's a matter of time. We're starting to see through the drug laws don't work. Banning drugs doesn't work. We can do better. And psychedelics might actually heal us instead of harming us. Imagine that. Take care.